Hi, Cora Stack again. I just want to talk about there's a lot of interest in my paper internationally on the Protective Disclosures Amendment Act or Act as amended, and just I'm looking at the constitutional issues here and just trying to examine them. And so, when a new law refits the old, what's the constitutional implications of that? The act was amended in a significant way in 2023, and the question is there any constitutional issues here that should be questioned? So I'm only just exploring it at the moment because I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but there's something there that just raises a question about the constitutionality of what was done in that amendment. So I want to raise a question about how laws that can be changed and what that can mean for the Constitution or for public trust. I mean, I have concerns, but it's very complex. So I'm just trying to raise them here. This isn't about any one person or department. It's about a pattern that can happen when a government fixes a problem, not by admitting it, but by rewriting the rules afterwards. The basic idea: imagine the Act of the Oireachtas is passed to protect people who speak up about wrongdoing, say the Whistleblowing Act of 2014. Then, in how the Act is carried out, there are serious gaps. For example, acts of omission, that's the implementation. There are serious acts. I authored that paper myself. It's on academia.iu. Things that perhaps should have been done, but weren't. If a court ever looked closely, these omissions might count as mistakes or even wrongdoings by public bodies or the state. Now imagine that instead of facing these problems in this way, a new amended act is brought in. The new version quietly rewrites or weakens the earlier duties so that what looked unlawful before now looks perfectly fine under the new rules. In other words, the new law seems to retrofit legality onto past illegality. Why this matters? This raises a simple but serious question. Is it constitutional? This is where I'm coming from now, being a mathematician, trying to kind of, figure out there's something wrong here. What is it? It's more than just there's something. Is it constitutional for the state to make a weaker law that in effect legitimizes its own earlier failure? So this is the question that I was trying to raise recently in a High Court judicial review, really, behind, this was the real question, but I didn't articulate perhaps in this way, but really this is in fact what I was trying to raise. Is it constitutional for the state to make a weaker law that in effect legitimizes its own earlier failures, allegedly? Under the Irish Constitution, all public power is supposed to work under the rule of law. Government actions must be lawful at the time they are done, not made lawful afterwards. The Oireachtas can change the law for the future, but when a change wipes away possible accountability for the past, we start to blur the lines between lawful government and self-justifying government. The Constitution also rests on separation of powers. This is why I brought this to the attention of the courts, but it was ignored, in my opinion, in the High Court. Ignored, and in fact, I was told I was a loser when I was trying to raise this concern. Can you imagine doing that to somebody like me? Because I was trying to raise this ethical issue. I was told I was a loser by said judge. And it's incredible how gaslighted that judgment was, in my opinion. It was horrendously gaslighted, but in terms of the evidence that I presented, which was not, I was not approached by any media outlet to ask my side of the story. Courts decide whether something was legal. Should decide whether something is legal, but they choose to gaslight my evidence, allegedly. The executive cannot rewrite history to avoid that review. So when a new act makes past omissions suddenly look compliant, it may test that boundary. That's why I was going to the court. But said judge, was so insulting. It was unbelievable how insulting it was. It was really narcissistic and gaslighted my evidence out of all proportion, allegedly. It was deliberate, in my opinion. It was deliberate gaslighting, too. And it was all done the day before the election. It was horrendous. I nearly got a nervous breakdown from what he did to me. So the question isn't whether any one minister meant harm. We won't, won't say that. But the question is, can reactive legislation repair that conceals or neutralises wrongdoing ever be squared with constitutional principles of accountability, transparency, and fair procedures. Like, that's what I was bringing to judicial review. I mean, that's what I was bringing to that level. And the judge was, was horrible to me. He was absolutely outrageously horrible. I mean, he was absolutely horrific to me, and the insults that he did. When I couldn't have been. There was nobody in the country capable of understanding the complexity. And yet, the way he tore me down repeatedly was unreal. Unreal what he did to me. Or just to quietly erode them. So let's just forget about the names here and just look at the actions. Can retroactive legislation repair that conceals or neutralises wrongdoing ever be squared with constitutional principles of accountability, transparency, and fair procedures? And I emphasise constitutional principles here, or does it quietly erode them? These were the questions we were trying to ask, and they were ignored or gaslighted by said judge, allegedly. That's a discussion worth having, calmly, publicly, and with respect for the Constitution we all depend on. Closing, thank you for listening. If you care about how laws are changed and how constitutional safeguards protect honesty in government, share this video or talk about it. Democracy works best when we all ask careful questions. So we don't want to make any direct allegations. We're using very plain English. We're trying to use clear constitutional focus here. We don't really want to mention anyone who only said judge was horrific towards me, and I'm still very upset. I absolutely got a nervous breakdown from the way I was gaslighted, or I felt gaslighted by this judge, and so that's the way it is, and it's a terrible thing to do. You go in good faith, thinking you're going to meet justice, and you come out feeling that you've been completely gaslighted and made a complete fool of, and you've been denigrated and reduced, reduced that sort of contempt, treated with contempt by a judge allegedly. So that's how I felt. I just felt like that. It stays with you, when you're knocked like this. They know your weak spots. They must kind of have you figured out some way. Maybe they're watching you on YouTube. That's what it is. They know your weak spots and how they'll get you. They'll surgically attack your evidence and you're twisted around allegedly. So I'm very concerned because this has reached the press, and in a major way, and it's turned around in a huge way in the press, and it's shocking really what the press are saying, because they've no clue about the facts, clueless. Well, I'm sharing some of them here, but they're not constitutional lawyers or anything like that. So, and in fairness, Judge O'Higgins was fantastic. I mean, he's a beautiful man. I mean, he wasn't a bit like that. He wasn't a gaslighter, a manipulator, actually. No, he wasn't anything like that. Or he wasn't a hard, has a hard man. Perhaps he doesn't have the caseload that these other judges have, massive caseloads, and it can some of the caseloads can be very difficult to deal with. Can have a terrible effect on the mind of people. So we have to look at the other side. But I mean, I don't know the life of this judge, but certainly I do know some of the work he does is the work I should do is extraordinarily difficult. So that's the story for the moment. And this is the point I was trying to make. And perhaps he didn't understand it. He didn't understand this, but he didn't strike me as a fool now. But he didn't drop me a fool. But there are pictures going around of him with a very close relative of Simon Harris on X, and I'm sure that would that be fake? All the pictures, and would that not be a conflict of interest? That wasn't declared now. And there's stories that that he did represent Simon Harris years ago. As a major partner in a firm in Dublin. But again, that's all alleged. But the picture, I'd say, entirely fake with Francis Richard. It's going around X, and that suggests a conflict of interest. With said minister, who was one of the respondents. So these are just questions that I'm asking. But really, we don't only want to name anything. We want to just to raise the issue, really, about the Constitution issues of changing the law in this way, rather than going to the court to get it, which is what I wanted as the main researcher here. I wanted this to go to the court, for the court to have a look at it and to decide what to do with it, rather than to do it the other way. So when I went to the court, I got knocked big time by said judge. So But if a minister had gone to the court, I'd say he'd have been treated a lot better than I was, because he'd have a lot of power and illegality with that. And really, I thought that was the way to do it, not the other way. So, but when I tried to do it my way, or the right way, I got knocked big time, sadly. But sure, this happens in life, and judges can be as they are, and they can treat female litigants, particularly lay litigants, with absolute and utter contempt. And unfortunately, that's how I felt treated.